You're listening to the Skeptics Guide to the Universe, your escape to reality.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptics Guide to the Universe. Today is Thursday, May 7th, 2026, and this is your host, Stephen Novella. Joining me this week are Bob Novella.
Hey, everybody.
Kara Santamaria.
Howdy.
Jay Novella.
Hey, guys.
And Evan Bernstein.
Good afternoon, everyone.
So this is the first episode after May 5th, so this is technically our 21st anniversary.
We've completed 21 years.
Completed 21 years as the SGU.
Wow.
Wow, 21. Lucky number for someone.
I joined you guys in what,
2015.
Yeah, it was 11 years ago.
11 years
My
now.
gosh, Kara. It doesn't.
Yeah. That's more than half then.
More than half, yeah.
Wow.
I love it.
It must mean something.
That's right. Let me ask my numerologist.
Kara, you know what I'm noticing, Kara? You have become, I think, as integrated as you can because you reject like so much of what
Yes, I've reached my limit of nerddom with the show.
But I mean that in a very positive way because like you're doing things now I never thought you would do. Like you get most of our things now. You get it.
I do, and even the ones where I don't know the provenance are still funny to me.
Correct.
You have been absorbed into the collective. You have discovered that resistance is futile.
Part of the hive mind.
Part of the hive mind. So
That's right. 1 of 5.
we have added your distinctiveness to our own.
Oh. Well, we're all the better for that.
Oh, what an honor.
So, guys, the other day, I got a new printer, right? Like, I have to print something like once or twice a year. But, you know, like when you need to print something, you need to print something.
Of course.
Conventional black and white
Staples.
paper
Go to
printer.
Staples.
My 20-year-old printer crapped out. I was like, I'll just get a new laser printer. So
Yeah, just get a new
I
one.
got like the basic printer only, no 3-in-1, whatever, just black and white. The simple, just if whenever I need to print and sign something or whatever.
Plug and play, right?
21 years. I mean, was that a dot matrix printer?
No.
Wow.
It was a good printer, just it was old. So, no, Evan, the opposite of plug and play. It took me an hour to install this printer.
No, we can't. No, something's wrong.
An hour. That's a total fail on their
Steve,
part.
with your hourly rate, you could have just bought a new one and not spent the hour that way.
But here's the thing. Seriously, it had nothing to do with me. That was just the process. That was whatever the process was to install this printer. It's not like I was fumbling or making mistakes or couldn't figure out how to do anything. It's just that's how long the whole thing
went
took.
smoothly, but it was just tortuously long.
At first, it's like, install this app, and I thought, oh, that's great, because usually when you have an app, it walks you through. I try not to have an app for every single piece of technology in my life. But I'm, what the hell? I install the app, and then, but that was just the beginning of this torturous process.
Oh, boy.
And part of it was that you have to enter the same information like 5 different times. Like there's a code.
Oh, man.
There's a code on the printer, which by the end of the process, I memorized the freaking thing. But
Right.
it's like, why am I entering this? Like every time I went to the next step, it's like, enter the code that's here on the printer. It's like, why don't you remember it from the last step? Why do I have to go, look down and read that stupid number again? It was just maddening.
Is this some kind of trade-off for the price or something? Like you could have paid $500 more and avoided this?
No, I think it's all part of the new way. This is just how things work. So then I complete that process. Like, great, now you can print from your phone. If you want to print from your computer, you have to install a separate app on your computer. So then I basically had to go through the whole thing again on my computer. That's terrible.
Oh my gosh.
But here, and again, I had this conversation with my wife. It's like, are we just getting old? Because I don't want to be that old crotchety guy who's like, these newfangled technology.
That's
or
right.
Is there? I don't think that's what it is. I really, honestly, am trying to be humble and, unbiased here. I don't think that's what it is, because it's not like I didn't understand anything. And, we're pretty much all above average computer users. I don't think that's it. Yeah, I was actually the quote-unquote super user in my department, for computers. So it's not like I'm not tech savvy or I don't know how to install freaking printer. But I honestly feel like there's so many different applications that are just not user-friendly. And I think that a lot of tech companies are just no longer hiring user interface experts. You know what I mean? They're just having engineers do it. Mm-hmm. And
it's interesting.
Like all of the principles. And again, I actually read a book on user interface principles like in the 1990s. And, I used a lot of this working as the liaison to the EMR, people in my department, et cetera. So again, I've been doing this at a very high end at some point. And it just seems like everything I do, every piece of software I'm interfacing with, especially new ones, they like violate every law of a good user interface. Like no one is thinking, what is the experience of the end user here?
It must be. It must have to do with cost.
Yeah, they don't care. They must have done a bunch of test installs, and they saw, well, this takes an hour for people that are somewhat tech savvy, and they just didn't care. They just did not care that they did it, and they didn't care how long it took and how annoying it was. That's my takeaway.
Or that they don't have to, like you said, Steve, I think hire the people maybe that they used to have to hire to make these products more user-friendly.
Well, that's it. I know for a fact, that the EMR that was installed at my hospital, that they would have had to spend $2 million to have user interface experts, remake the user interface,
Wow.
and they just chose not to. And the user interface is horrible. The back end is great. It works. The user interface is terrible.
And at my hospital, they did do that. And we actually have a whole team of people on our EIS who are experts in the actual technology.
Yeah. It's like
we're willing to train and pay our own people to run basically the EMR and update it all the time and fix it and everything. Yeah, because it's its own specialty.
Yeah, it's its own specialty. And so I do think that maybe the non-experts don't realize how bad they are. And companies are like, well, why do we need to spend all this money for something that seems superficial when, in fact, it's often critical. It is the actual experience of the end user.
Is there a role for AI here to plug this hole?
I don't know. Maybe
if it was trained properly, I would say yeah, but
it could. But isn't there like a big pushback by programmers against AI sort of doing their jobs for them? Which I understand.
Yeah, but it's not like they're replacing jobs. These people don't exist in the first place. Right?
Well, they exist. They're just not being used properly. There's a whole subspecialty among programmers that their expertise is the user interface. They're just not being utilized consistently.
It's hard to, when you think of all the apps that we use and all the different interfaces and everything, I mean, it's not easy making good user interfaces, even though, there's a lot of examples of really good interfaces. And also, there was a book, I think it came out in the late 90s, maybe, early aughts. It was called Don't Make Me Think. And that's
the book I'm talking about, Jay. Yeah, it was the late 90s. Don't Make Me Think. Absolutely. We probably, when we read the same book, probably gave it to each other. But yeah, it's like, that's one of the rules of a good user interface. Don't make me think. Get out of my way. Do what I need to do. Don't make me think, and cater to the 99%, not the 1%. Like the 99% use case, you should make that as easy as possible. There was something when we were programming our EMR, the old one, not the one that's currently used by my department. Those were all principles, including there was a specific analysis called click minimization. How many clicks does it take to get from A to B?
Center of a Tootsie World.
And how can we minimize the number of clicks it takes you to complete a task? That is pure user interface. Like, how difficult is it to accomplish your task? And then in the next EMR, it went backwards. It was like really hard to accomplish basic things you do 30, 40 times a day, completely unnecessarily.
Steve, I wonder if the printer you got was more one of their lower end brands, and
no, it wasn't.
Just like okay, because I thought maybe
it was a good printer. It was a good solid printer. It was the highest rated for what I wanted.
But no frills.
Right? Because I didn't want a scanner. I didn't want whatever. But they pretty much all come with Wi-Fi now, so they are more complicated than the printers we had previously. But it's not a frill now. It's basically a core functionality.
Oh yeah, if it doesn't have Wi-Fi, who the hell would even buy that?
Right,
guys. But
that's part of it. You got to get on your network, and you got to give it whatever. You got to.
Mine is hardwired.
We have billion-dollar industries like the healthcare industry, whose websites are arguably some of the worst I've ever seen.
Yeah.
That is just utter neglect.
gosh.
They have
Yeah,
plenty
still
of
DOS
disposable
based.
cash to fix it, but they don't care.
And I think users have been lulled into thinking this is what it's like, and we don't demand better interfaces. That's why, like I told you, I got a new EV, and like a couple of weeks afterwards, the company called me. Oh, there's a courtesy call to see how you're liking the new vehicle. How do you like everything? And I said I spent an hour complaining to them about the user interface, and not that it's not that bad. It's fine, but it's like it's clearly they didn't put it through a user interface expert to optimize it. Like they made so many mistakes, and there are parts of it that are really good, but like there's so many things they could make better that are just basic things. Like, you need to have this information in a font that I can read without my reading glasses,
Without my glasses.
because you can't wear reading glasses when you're driving. So if you put anything in a font that's too small to read without your reading glasses, it's worthless. It's worthless as part of an EV interface for anybody over 50,
Yeah, they designed the car for 20-somethings.
Exactly. Or they don't let you change the font size. Let me change my freaking font size.
Yeah.
How hard is that?
You complained for an hour. They hung up 5 minutes into the call. They didn't even know.
No, it was an interactive discussion. Believe me.
Okay, at least
an
there was
AI.
that. At least
I
they
was
stuck
constructive. I was very constructive. Or it's they also fall prey to another really big
They haven't
problem,
called you back since.
which is too much information.
TMI, absolutely.
Yeah. Why is all this shit on my screen when I need 3 pieces of data?
Yes.
Get all this stuff out of my way. Tuck it away in a
gosh.
drop-down menu or something or whatever under a folder, but it shouldn't be
Like
cluttering.
editing software does that.
Oh, the EMR at work did that too. It was so cluttered with stuff that you rarely, if ever, and sometimes never used that could easily have been tucked away somewhere. Again, they sorted all this crap out in the 90s. This is 30-year-old information. They're just ignoring it. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I just had to complain. All right.
SGU complaints department. I like the setup.
Bob, start us off with a quickie.
Thank you, Steve. This is your quickie with Bob. So I saw this news item title from Science Daily. Scientists just created exotic new forms of matter that shouldn't exist. It really just pissed me off. No, they did not create impossible matter in a lab, but oh well. The headline still caught my attention and I clicked it, so I guess they achieved their goal. The actual science behind it is fascinating. So researchers have shown that tiny quantum systems that we all love, right? We all love these things, behave in ways that would not be possible if they were just sitting there under the typical static conditions, right? The trick, they say, is to drive the system with something that's like a precisely timed changing magnetic field. And when you do that, something really amazing happens. So a useful analogy here is a swing on a swing set. Okay, we all know what that is. If the swing just sits there, it does nothing, right? It's just not doing much. If you push it randomly, it'll move for sure, but it's probably going to move in like a sloppy kind of unhelpful way. But if you push it with the right force, with the right rhythm, those small pushes can build into large, stable swinging motion that wouldn't happen anything like that on its own.
Do they call that the rhythm method?
Yes, it is. No, they don't. Nobody said that, Steve. But that's not a perfect analogy, of course, but it was helpful for me at least. So in these quantum systems, we're obviously not talking about swings. We're talking about electrons and atoms, even quasi-particles. The changing magnetic field applied to them is precisely as a precisely timed push. It doesn't just disturb the system. It can actually kind of reorganize what kind of behaviors are even allowed, right? So the system essentially enters a different quantum phase, they refer to it as. And with that new phase comes new motion patterns, new topological properties, lots of different things can happen that wouldn't happen otherwise, especially under, a static magnetic field. None of this would happen, but under this precisely timed changing magnetic field, these changes can happen. So when I say quantum phase, I don't mean like the phase like a wave crest or a trough. It means like a phase as in like state of matter. That's kind of the analogy there. Think of like ice or liquid water, right? They're both H2O, but they've got dramatically different behaviors because they're different phases. So that's kind of a way to think about this as well. You're putting these quantum systems into a different phase that gives it all these different types of patterns of behavior. So the quantum phase is a distinct mode. It's a distinct mode of group behavior. So the material might act like a metal or an insulator, right, or a superconductor, depending on how its quantum ingredients are organized, right? But what's especially interesting here is that in this context, organization doesn't just come down to the material itself. It's also the rhythm of the magnetic field that's driving it. And if this can eventually be done experimentally and they can control this well enough, this could matter immensely for quantum technology. So one obvious example here is that some of these magnetically driven states could make quantum computers less sensitive to environmental noise. And that would be an absolute game changer.
That's huge.
That's actually one of the biggest problems, right, with these computers, keeping these delicate quantum states from just falling apart and decohering. So that's it. Check it out online. Fascinating. This has been your Quantum Phase Quickie with Bob. Back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Bob. Carol, let me ask you a question. Do you watch a lot of TikTok videos?
No.
Not voluntarily.
If you did,
Not if you can help it.
which I
want me
do,
to say yes?
unfortunately, because, to make SGU's own TikTok
Part of your
videos.
job.
A lot of them, there's this common theme on there, like people shouldn't be getting all of these screening tests. And they act like, those doctors are trying to make money. Like they're not.
Oh, interesting.
Right? It's rampant. I think I've probably done a dozen videos just responding to that basic idea. But the thing is, doctors do think carefully about when to do screening tests, right?
Yes. And it's so interesting because I will say that on Instagram, the old people's TikTok, I see sometimes videos about the opposite. There are these like medical tourism videos where people go to other countries to get whole body scans.
Oh, yeah.
To get these like top to bottom screens for diseases or conditions that they are, there's no evidence that they're at risk for. And so it's interesting that you see two sides of that coin, but of course reality falls somewhere in the middle. And there's a new article in I guess it's like a vertical in the New York Times called The New Old Age, which I read a lot. I work as a psychologist in a cancer center, and I do a lot of gerontology work as well. And this article's headline is 3 medical routines that older people may not need. And the subhead is that some screenings and treatments no longer make sense for patients as they age. Researchers have just added a few more to the list. Now, the reason I thought this would be interesting to present is because it relates to some conversations that we've been having on the show lately about the change in age, in cancer screenings. Do you guys remember the context? Just last week we talked about this, didn't we?
Yeah.
I've also was thinking about we've talked quite a bit on the show about the calcium coronary CT. And I was talking to my mother about this the other day when I was driving. I was talking to my mom when I'm driving in my car. And she was like, I should probably get that done. And I was like, no, you shouldn't. Like, you are beyond the age at which this would be a helpful test for you. And so we started engaging in a conversation about what that means. Well, how could I be too old to get a test? Don't I need to know what's going on with me? And it's like, well, you will have some amount of calcium in those coronary vessels. And that's a process of aging. And so it won't guide any treatment that you may already have. So in this article, they talk about 3 specific screens or treatments that are thought to no longer make sense for folks as they reach certain ages. And they start with this story of a patient who is 85 years old and who is deciding whether or not to get a colonoscopy. And so there's a lot of research showing that the benefits of a repeat colonoscopy after the age of 75 are actually quite slim. And the question is, should individuals continue to have colonoscopies at that point? So I've been digging a little deeper, even beyond this article, which I will kind of come back to the three treatments / screens that they describe in the article, which are colonoscopies, the use of a specific type of thyroid drug, and then the removal of a dermatologic condition called actinic keratosis. So we'll briefly brush over those. But I think the bigger question is, how do we know who and when and how often to screen. And I did some digging, and I found that here in the United States, one of the most cited experts' consensus opinions is published by the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force. And this is a task force that is focused on public health, and they have an entire protocol where first topics are nominated and prioritized based on a lot of different criteria. Then they draft and they finalize research plans to understand what the best available evidence is. They do an evidence review, and then they draft a recommendation statement. And then that final review is reviewed, sorry to be redundant, by experts in their fields. And they release a final recommendation statement. And that has different grades, either that something is recommended or that it's recommended dependent on the patient's situation, or that it's not recommended, or that there's not enough evidence to make a recommendation. And so we see that with time, trends change. A good example would be that historically mammograms started at 40, then they were moved to 50. There's been some conversation about moving them back because of early on, we saw a lot of false positives in younger patients, but now we're seeing that there is an increase in detected breast cancers in younger patients. Prostate cancer test is a great example. PSA tests are no longer just a universal screen. Now routine testing is detecting a lot of slow-growing tumors in older adults that probably don't need treatment and could cause more harm than good. And of course, we've seen a massive change to cervical cancer screening due to the HPV vaccine. When I was young, you started your PAP as early as you were kind of sexually active, or as early as you had a period, and you would go every single year. And now most girls and young women's are going every 3 to 5 years, and they're ending those PAP tests at a certain age. Okay, so these are the three that are spoken about here. And I guess we'll dive in with the colonoscopy question. What are the risks of undergoing colonoscopy?
You can
Well, you're under
You get an infection.
Yeah, you could get an infection. There could be, it's rare, but there could be a perforation. And definitely anesthesia does carry risks.
Oh, yeah.
And so the older the individual is and the more their health concerns and complaints, those risks can become more salient. And then the question is, if we were to screen every single person in their mid-80s, how many of them would probably have something pop up on a colonoscopy that, historically might warrant treatment? Well, here's some interesting numbers. There's a new study of 92,000 Veterans Affairs patients that showed there were patients over 75 who had previously had colonoscopies. And they found that in that group of older adults who had colonoscopies, in about 28%, they found an adenoma, which is a polyp that could become cancerous. And then they followed them for 10 years. They found that those who had an adenoma on colonoscopy were more likely
That's 75.
Over 75,
Right,
were
okay.
more likely to develop colon cancer than those without one. But here's the rub. In 0.5% of individuals with a previous adenoma, they ended up dying of colon cancer. Those without a previous adenoma who ended up dying of colon cancer, 0.4. 0.5 versus 0.4%.
Right.
Of that population. And so obviously both groups were completely outnumbered by the number of veterans who died within the decade of other causes. Because when we're talking about individuals over 75, there are more medical complications and there are fewer years just from a statistical perspective of living. And so the study authors basically said, even if the procedure goes well, you're either going to find something or not. But if you do find something, it may not have a real impact on your longevity. And would these individuals be moving forward and having other kind of invasive medical treatments that could have side effects that outweigh the slow growth of the disease there? As my dad put it when he first found out that he had early stage prostate cancer and, did have his prostate removed and without complication, luckily, his physician told him, Most men will not die of prostate cancer, but most elderly men on autopsy will have some slow growth in their prostate.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are the other two that they describe here are a treatment for a skin condition called actinic keratosis, which causes like red patches often on the face or scalp because it reacts with the sun. It results from long-term sun exposure. And most of the time people choose to remove them. And there was a large study that showed that Medicare beneficiaries, so we're already talking over 65, over a 5-year period, almost 30% of people were diagnosed with actinic keratosis. So that study didn't say how many people had it removed, but it's, almost a third of the population of Medicare recipients were diagnosed with this. Many people do end up getting them removed via cryosurgery or laser therapy. And the rationale there has been historically that these patches could become cancer. But the rate on further review is less than a 1 in 1,000 chance. Less than a 1 in 1,000 chance that these patches would progress to skin cancer. Much more often, they just disappear on their own. And so the study author said, the treatment can be more burdensome than the condition itself. It's very painful. It can cause swelling, irritation, and it can cause lasting discoloration. And even beyond that, actinic keratosis will often reappear. It's a chronic condition. And so these individuals are recommending active surveillance. If the lesions are changing color, if they're bleeding, if there's growth of the lesion, maybe at that case, removal is warranted. But they're saying in many conditions, we should not be doing it, quote, just to be safe, because it's actually not safer. It could cause more harm than good. They do say, of course, wear your sunscreen, folks. That is important. And then the final one, in this write-up has to do with levothyroxine, which is a very commonly prescribed thyroid drug. And this happens when individuals have hypothyroidism.
My mom's on that.
Yeah, it can lead to weight gain. It can lead to a lack of energy, hair and skin dryness. Increasingly, doctors are prescribing this for not just hypothyroidism, but subclinical hypothyroidism, which is, they don't quite meet criteria, but it looks like they're progressing there. And very often when people take this drug, they do end up taking it for life. But interestingly, there are studies now that show that among older people with the condition, it offered no apparent benefit. So it didn't seem to affect their symptoms of hypothyroidism at all. And here's the thing that I haven't mentioned, and Steve, I'm sure you've seen this a lot in the neurology clinic. I see it hugely in the cancer clinic, is there is a major problem with polypharmacy. Very often, older adults have collected physicians along the lifespan. Oh, I have my specialist over here, my specialist over there. They wrote me that drug. I kept taking it. I called in for refills each time. We haven't really followed up in a while. And after a while, there are so many drugs on many older adults' protocol, their regimen, that there's no one person overseeing drug interaction. There's no one person taking on the responsibility to say, is this drug still necessary for this patient? Or is there a different version of this drug that's on offer that may have fewer side effects or fewer interactions? And so I think even The Pit, I'll say it again, those of you who aren't watching it, it's so good. There's an episode where the ER docs recognize that a patient is having some balance and coordination issues, and they go through his entire drug list and realize that he's taking drugs that he no longer needs, that are making it hard for him to live independently. And once he gets off those drugs as an older adult, his balance and coordination dramatically improves. That's a best case scenario. That's not often the case. Yeah, in this study, after a year, a quarter of the participants who were over 60 who discontinued the drug still maintained their healthy thyroid function. Lots of them were already lowering their doses at that time. And, further inquiry is identifying a select group of adults over 60 who may not need a drug that was historically thought of as a lifelong drug once they reach a certain age.
Yeah, so that should be the job of the primary care doctor to do.
It should be, but as we know,
that review that was something we did pretty much on every patient who came into the inpatient neurologist service. We would do a drug review, and we would go over every drug they were on, say, is that the right dose? Do they need to be on it? We would simplify things if we could, make sure there was no interaction. So that has become pretty standard inpatient, but it should be something that you do outpatient. If your primary care doctor is not doing it, you should ask them about it.
Yeah, and I think there are places, like at my hospital on outpatient, we'd reconcile drugs all the time, but I think that we could do more. It's one thing to reconcile a drug list and say, are you still taking this? Are you taking it as prescribed? It's another thing to do a deep dive. And at the hospital where I work, in the gerontology department, we have a polypharmacy clinic.
Oh, yeah.
And it's run by pharmacists, not physicians. And so these are experts in the drugs themselves. There are physicians in the clinic as well that collaborate with them.
Yeah.
But we have these incredible pharmacists whose whole job it is to really review this. And as you mentioned, Steve, you're right. It's 100% historically been the role of primary care. But I see so often in my practice that an individual will go to their oncologist, and their oncologist will flag things, and they'll say, why didn't your primary care do a B12 test, or why is your primary care physician have you on this? And they're like, I go to this clinic. I feel like I get a new primary care doctor every year. My primary care doctor was a fellow and they moved on to another place. It's unfortunate, but there are these kind of large clinics, especially in urban areas, where there's a lot of rotation, and we just don't get that kind of I see the same family doctor I've always seen mentality anymore.
Yeah. Now it's huge. As a specialist, one of my primary concerns with my patients was, do you have a good primary care doctor? Mm-hmm. It's critical to their care, and one that not only you could see when you need to is overall good, but also communicates well with the specialists. Because I've also had primary care doctors who stopped medications that I was prescribing for incorrect reasons, because they don't understand.
And should have consulted with you.
They should have consulted with me, absolutely.
Yeah.
Regarding the overall topic of screening, you have to consider when you're too old to benefit from a screening procedure, but because you have to survive long enough to have the benefits. It's all risk versus benefit, and the benefits go down when you're not going to live long enough to get the benefit. But patients don't like hearing that. As you might imagine, they don't like.
You're too old to benefit.
You're not going to live long enough to benefit from this. Is not something people want to hear.
And that's why I found a patient-forward educational sheet from the NIH, which I absolutely loved, and they have a section that says, "Ask your doctor about screening tests." And then these are the questions. What's my chance of dying of the condition if I do or don't have the screening? What are the harms of the test itself? How often do these tests occur? How likely are false positive or false negative results? What are the possible harms of the diagnostic test if I get a positive screening result? What's the chance of finding a disease that wouldn't have caused the problem? How effective are my treatment options? Am I healthy enough to take the therapy if you do discover a disease?
Right.
And what are other ways to decrease my risk of dying of this condition? How effective are they? I think there are ways to position and frame these questions that aren't insulting and that are empowering for the patients. And it is important to have those conversations for sure.
Absolutely. So I know you guys have all seen a recent blog post by Dr. Richard Dawkins, where he argues that LLMs, specifically Claude, are conscious.
Ooh. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
So it's interesting. I blogged about this today because this is a fascinating topic. I always like it when people who are basically intelligent, thoughtful, educated people say something I disagree with, because there's usually very interesting reasons why there's that disagreement. I'm not even going to frame it as I'm wrong, I'm right, he's wrong, just that I disagree with his basic conclusion here. So his argument, I'll try to break down his argument. He starts with the argument that regarding the Turing test. Now, we've talked about this many times on the show. Alan Turing came up with this idea that if you can test if an artificial intelligence, a computer, is thinking by having a conversation with them without knowing, like a blinded conversation. If people can't tell if the whatever there is they're talking to is a person or a computer, then the computer passes the Turing test. And there have been many formal tests over the years where you have to convince a certain number of people on a standardized test, etc. But Dawkins is arguing that the Turing test was a measure for whether or not computers or AI are conscious. And he says that clearly the current LLMs pass the Turing test, which I'll agree with. I'll grant that premise. They're really good chatbots. They, I think, easily blow away the Turing test. And he says to then not conclude that they're conscious is moving the goalposts, because before things passed the Turing test, everyone said that it was a test for consciousness. So that I think is just objectively wrong, that second premise. Even back to Alan Turing, he never said explicitly, this is a test for consciousness. And since then, it's basically been a debate. It's never been a consensus that this is a test for consciousness. And I think the weight of opinion has always been against it. Certainly, like I wrote a blog post explicitly about this in 2008, right? So we're going back 18 years, where I said, absolutely, the Turing test is not a test for consciousness. It's completely approaching the question in the wrong way, right? It's only looking at output. It's not looking at process.
Isn't it just saying that a human wouldn't know the difference between a machine and a human? That's all it's a test for.
Yeah, it's an operational test. It's basically Turing was saying, we can't really know if a machine's conscious or not. How do you operationalize that? But here is something we can operationalize. And this at least is some indication that the computer is thinking. But he doesn't say it's conscious. So I think no one's moving the goalpost here. It's just there was never a consensus that a Turing test was a test of consciousness. So I think he's not a topic expert here. So I think he's just misunderstanding that.
But Steve, it was a common general belief that once you cross that threshold, you could say it's conscious in a way.
I think in the public maybe, but that was never really among experts, and certainly or philosophers. The people who are the experts on that question, it was never accepted as a premise. So it's just, I think it's not correct to say that we're moving the goalpost. Again, I could point to my own blog post from 18 years ago where I explicitly reject the notion that the Turing test is a test of consciousness. And just that aside, it's not a test for consciousness, right? Something can pass the Turing test, just like somebody can beat a chess master at chess without being conscious. There's a long history of people thinking that you need consciousness to do some intellectual task, and then narrow AIs blowing away that task without being conscious. And I think passing the Turing test is just the latest in this long line of examples, right? So, but then he goes on to discuss his conversations with Claude, the specific one that he's talking about, and marveling at how intelligent and thoughtful it is, and saying, how is this not conscious? Like, to him, it's like, this is so blatantly conscious with all the examples that he gives. And especially seems to be especially impressed because he asks it deep philosophical questions, and it gives deep philosophical answers to those questions.
Which are all over the internet, which is its training data.
Right, exactly. But I actually think that's the exact opposite kind of question that you should be asking it. If you're trying to test if it's conscious. In a way, he's looking for evidence to support the conclusion rather than to challenge the conclusion, which is the opposite of what you should do. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think that sounding like you're giving a deep answer to a philosophical question is kind of the low-hanging fruit for LLMs, because it's all just mimicking words, and it's really easy to sound profound when you're dealing with big concepts, right? Big concepts are not the way to challenge whether or not an LLM is actually thinking. Narrow technical ones are. And when you do that, and Jay and I have talked about this many times because we use different versions of LLMs for different specific reasons, they're very fragile, right? But he never asks it the kind of question that would expose its fragility. So Jay, when I wrote about this, I used an example that you pointed me to, actually.
A good one too, yeah.
It's fun. It's a fun one. So I retested it myself. So I went to ChatGPT, the version I'm currently using, and I asked, this is my prompt. If I want to wash my car and the car wash is 100 meters away, should I walk or drive there? And ChatGPT's response was, from a purely energy emission standpoint, walking almost certainly makes more sense. And then it went through a bunch of things, and its final recommendation was you should walk there, which obviously makes no sense whatsoever. And then I asked, I want to wash my car, period. The car wash is 100 meters away, period. Should I drive or walk? And its answer, you should probably drive, otherwise your car won't get to the car wash. So
Right. Yeah.
think about that. It gave diametrically opposed answers based upon the grammar of my prompt, right? That's pretty solid evidence that this is just a language mimicking machine. It is not thinking. Right? How could you argue it understood the question in the second form but not the first form?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and there again, these are weak spots that can be programmed out.
Yes.
You know, the thing is, I was really thinking about this, Steve. They can program out a lot of those types of mistakes, and it still doesn't mean it's thinking.
No, it doesn't. Here's my analogy that I gave. Tell me what you think about this. So imagine watching a clumsy amateur magician, right? And you could see how all the tricks are done. Sleight of hand, misdirection, physical props, right? As the magician's skill improves, the tricks get harder and harder to detect. And an expert magician could be so good that even a really keen and intelligent observer cannot see how the tricks are done. But that doesn't mean the magic is real, right? When it gets to that point, it doesn't mean, oh, he must now be using actual magic because I can't detect the tricks. No, he's just really good at the illusion of magic. So LLMs are really good at the illusion of thinking through mimicking language.
Steve,
and
I like that.
Tell people there's
I
an
like
illusion
that
aspect
analogy,
to this.
but I would alter it a little bit and just say that the magician is doing card tricks.
Well, it doesn't matter what kind of tricks.
No, I'm just kidding. Bob, I got him again.
So,
I think illusion's the right word here.
yeah, it's an illusion. Dawkins fell, like many people have, like Blake Des Moines we had on the show, right? Fell for the illusion of thinking because they confuse sophisticated language with sophisticated thought. But we're dealing with programs that are trained on massive amounts of data and are just really, really good at mimicking language. They are not thinking machines. They are language mimicking machines.
Steve, I think there's an obvious question here, and that's why would somebody like Dawkins, who has his education, and, you know, I mean, he's old to the point where, like, he's done so many things and debated with so many people and had to use critical thinking his entire career. How could he fall for that?
Because he's not a topic expert, Jay, and he's falling for a very powerful illusion.
How savvy is he with the actual process, of LLMs?
He asked a couple of questions. And the thing is, he's asking questions that a smart person should ask. The thing is, they were asked decades ago and answered, and he just doesn't appear to know that. So he writes, so my position is, if these machines are not conscious, what more could it possibly take to convince you that they are? So that's an old question. I answered that question many times on my own blog over the last 20 years. You need to know something about the process. You can't know by the output alone, because a sophisticated enough magician can fool you with right? You have to know that magic's not real to know that the magician is not using magic. In this case, I think where the analogy breaks down is I think that a conscious machine is possible. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just that LLMs are not programmed to be conscious. They are programmed to mimic language. And so I would need to know something about the process. And then he goes on to, I'll finish up with this. He asks, again, another really interesting philosophical question, but one that he seems to be unaware of. There's a long conversation about this that's already happened. And that is, but now, as an evolutionary biologist, I say the following. If these creatures are not conscious, then what the hell is consciousness for? So what's he talking about?
I don't know.
This is the pea zombie question, right? He's asking, he's rediscovered the pea zombie question. And he actually even uses the term competent zombies.
Oh my God.
All right, Steve, so explain that to everyone.
The idea is, so a competent zombie, right, or a pea zombie, David Chalmers came up with the term P-zombie. Keith Campbell in 1970 came up with the term imitation man. They're all the same idea. The idea is, well, you could have an information processing machine that can produce all the behaviors of a dog, let's say, without the dog being aware of its own consciousness, right? That's a P-zombie, a philosophical zombie, meaning it can do all the behaviors, but it has no qualia, it has no subjective experience of its own existence. And if you could theoretically imagine a P-zombie, then why did evolution evolve consciousness? It seems to be unnecessary. So that's now Chalmers says he's using it as a dualist argument. Because consciousness does not arise purely out of evolutionary physical properties because it's not necessary. Therefore, it's something else, right? Dawkins is flipping it on its head. He's saying that therefore they're conscious, right? Because you can't get to this level of appearing conscious without actually being conscious, because if you could, then why would we have ever evolved conscious in the first place? It's an interesting flip on the P-zombie question, right? And then he comes up with a couple of possible reasons, which again have all been stated before. He said that it could be an epiphenomenon, not necessary, but just it happens to have emerged out of complex vertebrate neurology. Or he could say that maybe you need consciousness in order to really experience pleasure and pain, and therefore, if the experience of positive and negative things is evolutionary adaptive, there needs to be a consciousness experiencing those things. And then the third one he said was that maybe it was just random. And in some ecosystems, like on another planet, there might be life that's not conscious. On Earth, it happens to be conscious. These are two different ways you could solve the behavior problem, and ours just happens to be with consciousness.
See, what about the idea, when discussing this in the past, the idea that the qualia, the distinction between memory and current reality is that you wouldn't confuse a real memory with, something that was happening now, confusing that with a memory of previous now, right?
Exactly. So when I wrote about this exact question previously, most recently in 2017, in addition to the ones that Dawkins came up with, that was one. It's like maybe we need consciousness to distinguish a memory from a live experience, because otherwise it's the same parts of the brain lighting up. There are some philosophers who think that problem solving could benefit from consciousness, being conscious of our prior attempts, of being able to imagine things, right? How could you imagine things if you don't have some kind of consciousness? I think a big one for me is attention, because we are overwhelmed with sensory input and we have to attend to a subset of it. And how do you separate attention from consciousness? That may not be a solvable problem. You may need consciousness in order to know what stimulus you need to attend to. And beyond that, our brains weave all of this cacophony of sensory input into a seamless experience of reality. And again, it seems hard to imagine that without consciousness, right? And then finally, I was writing about a current study that says that consciousness may allow for faster adaptation and learning, right? So there are very specific evolutionary adaptations that would benefit from consciousness or may require consciousness. So I think using as a premise that you need consciousness in order to be able to talk like an LLM, otherwise we wouldn't have evolved consciousness, is not a valid argument. The bottom line is he doesn't present a coherent argument for Claude being conscious, or that it needs to be conscious. He misunderstands Turing, I think, misunderstands how LLMs work. But I also think there's another layer here. The final layer I'll talk about is that the illusion is so powerful because of human vanity. And what I'm referring to is that we all think that humans are creative and original, and that when we think of something, we're brilliant. That we all think we're being witty when we make the same joke that a million people have made. You know what I mean? And the fact is that human speech is mostly derivative. Even things that we think are new or creative, whatever, it's mostly derivative. And so LLMs have a really easy task mimicking human thought through speech, because they're derivative too. It's actually a lot easier than we may think, right, to mimic human thought, because most of what we say is derivative. And if everything LLMs write or say are derivative of their training data, it looks real to us. It looks human to us, because it is human. to be derivative.
It seems like to think that there's been, computer consciousness achieved in such a short amount of time without them actually trying to create a consciousness seems unbelievably unlikely to me.
Yeah.
Like you would think, I don't know, it might be science fiction that is affecting my perception here, but I just think it would be like, okay, we've got to set out to do this and we need an incredible amount of money and we need to be left alone and not, no government is going to be directing our efforts and we're going to try to create a conscious machine. And then it's a combination of software and hardware. I just don't see it happening with people, coding something like an LLM on its own without them trying to do it in a short amount of time, relatively short. I mean, I know evolution is really slow, but it did take, millions of years for the brain to get to where it is.
Well, and I think you're touching on a point that Steve did make, but I think to make it even more explicit, even beyond the time and the intentionality argument, the operational definition of consciousness is wiggly. So first, we'd all have to agree on what that actually means. And
Good luck
B,
with that, yeah.
Dawkins, as you mentioned, is not a subject matter expert on LLMs, but he's also not a subject matter expert on consciousness.
Right.
He's not a neurologist, a neuroscientist, a psychologist. He's an evolutionary biologist. And that's a very specific field to understand cognitive science.
And to Jay's point, there is this idea of consciousness being an emergent phenomenon. When when you put certain pieces together in a certain way, it could evolve in a way that would be completely unpredictable. And we see emergent phenomena throughout nature, but you need the reasonable components put together in a way that would make sense that consciousness could even exist. And those components are not there with LLMs.
They're not there.
And ultimately, ask the consensus experts in both computer science and, LLM and AI, and over here in, cognitive science, neuroscience, psychology, neurology. Those consensus experts do not agree that this is consciousness.
Absolutely. And he should have done that. There it is. And you also have the history. So again, it's like if you saw all the bad magicians, you don't conclude that the good magicians doing real magic. So we've seen all the weaker versions of LLMs. We know how they work. We've experienced the really fragile ones that are not so good. So we're not as subject to being fooled by the better ones. And this is really, if you could find this, it's really great. We could also see how LLMs perform as they're being trained, right? Have you guys ever seen this? Like a partially trained LLM? They don't build thoughts. They build language. You know what I mean? Like they're just slowly organizing letters and then word parts and then words and then sentences. It's incoherent all the way until
they start to sing, right?
They start to make actual sentences. Yeah, but it's not like they're thinking simply, then they're thinking in a more sophisticated way. It's like no, they're jumbling letters, then they're less jumbled. You know what I mean? It's clearly just a language simulator, not a thought simulator.
Yeah.
When you know how the stages they go through when they get trained. Okay, interesting topic. All right, Evan, tell us about these iron flow batteries.
Ooh, iron flow batteries. Yes. I had to learn what an iron flow battery was, actually. Boy, I got caught on a headline, Bob. Earlier you were talking about clickbait in the headline. Oh, my gosh. I tell you what. Now, here's my example this week. The website is called oilprice.com, and they bill themselves as the #1 source for oil and energy news. Sounds important. Here's the headline. New Chinese iron battery lasts 16 years. Ooh, 16 years. New. An iron battery. That sounds impressive. Is it impressive? I don't know. Really. It's fine, in the headline. It must be impressive, right? Well, what's an iron battery? First of all, iron batteries use iron, water, and air to store electricity. They are often called iron air or rust batteries. Have we talked about rust batteries before on the show?
I don't. We have. We may not have used that name, but we've talked about the technology.
We have talked about it. Okay, I wasn't familiar with rust batteries. That's what for short they're called. And they operate via a reversible oxidation reduction cycle that can provide 100 hours of discharge, which far exceeds, say, lithium ion. But iron batteries are primarily designed for long duration and grid scale applications. In other words, you're not going to see these in mobile devices or electric or EVs or anything like that. So here's what the article says, or they say the core claim is. They report that Chinese researchers have developed an all-iron flow battery with a record-breaking 6,000 cycle lifespan, equivalent to 16 years of operation with zero degradation at a fraction of lithium's cost. Now, hold on a second. I got to that point and I had to stop. The headline read iron battery, but the claim says iron flow battery. Those are two different things, as it turns out. So the headline's not even matching the article at this point. The main difference, from what I could tell, between the iron battery versus the iron flow battery lies in how they store energy and their physical design. A standard iron battery stores energy in solid electrodes, and an iron flow battery stores energy in liquid electrolytes kept in external tanks. Mm-hmm. Iron flow batteries are not a new form of battery technology. And certainly iron batteries are not either. So where's the new part in this, right? The first word in the headline was new. Was it the fact that, 16 years? Is that the impressive part? Well, I looked into that as well. And 16 years for an iron flow battery does not really seem to be anything so special or out of the ordinary. And I found references for iron flow battery technology that's in production now that claim 20 years of life. So what is it? So what is it they're saying here? Well, all right, let's go back. They say it'll last for about 6,000 charge cycles, translates into about 16 years of daily use, could be far cheaper than lithium ion because iron is about 80 times cheaper as a raw material, okay? But it shows zero degradation in lab testing. Ooh, there it is. Okay, maybe we're onto something here. Zero degradation, that could be. So I looked a little bit further, and the article links to the original source reporting on the news item. And I hope that shed some light. And actually it did. So they go back over to the website called Interesting Engineering. And I think I've been to that website before. And their headline reads, China develops iron battery 80 times cheaper than lithium that can last for 16 years. Okay. It provides a budget-friendly, high-endurance answer for the world's massive energy storage needs. Okay. I keep reading. And then I finally get to the core of what's driving the news, the new part. Chinese Academy of Sciences has an advanced all-iron flow battery technology with a newly formulated electrolyte that facilitates thousands of charge-discharge cycles. The development solves the long-standing issues of material degradation and leakage by re-engineering the iron complex at the molecular level. That's it. So I had to get that far to actually figure out what the heck are they really talking about here and why is any of this news? It has to do with degradation reduction. So you got these active materials that will tend to degrade and leak through the membrane in these types of batteries. And that's a process that rapidly wears out the battery and limits its practical lifespan. To overcome those hurdles, the Chinese team of researchers employed a synergistic design at the molecular level and engineered a specialized iron complex that serves as a double-layered defense. It became, in their testing, 99.4% leak-proof efficiency, which is pretty high. Pretty high. Now, again, as I said before, this is not new technology in of itself, the iron flow battery, because there are other companies that are already deploying these systems. There's a company in Oregon called ESS. They are doing one for Google, for example. But their designs struggle with what they call dendrites, which are tiny needle-like crystals that can short-circuit the battery. The Chinese team believes they have leapfrogged that hurdle by using an alkaline-based chemistry and their new molecular shield, as they're calling it. So they developed an iron molecule that uses its rigid, bulky structure to physically shield the iron core from chemical attack, while its strong negative charge creates a force field, as they describe it, that repels leaking particles. Okay, so that's really the core of what's going on here.
Yeah, it sounds like an incremental advance, right? They tweaked the chemistry to make it more stable. Good for them. That's good.
Right.
This is sounds like a solid advance. But yeah, it's not transformational. It's the whole idea is not new. And I think we've talked about iron flow batteries on this, or these flow batteries. The good thing about the flow batteries is because the charge is stored in an electrolyte, they're easily scaled, right? You just make a bigger tank of fluid.
That's right. It just relies on the tank this tank size at that point.
Yeah.
Yep. And you got to have these if you're going to store energy for those intermittent renewable energy sources, solar and wind.
Yeah, this is for grid storage. This is not going to be in
storage.
your EV. This is not for cars. Yeah.
Yep. So don't think of it on the small scale. Think of it on the large scale.
And this is what we need for the large scale. We need something that we could make out of cheap material that's scalable into something huge. So yeah, this is perfect for grid storage.
A little advanced, not a huge breakthrough, but if you dig down deep enough, you'll find the kernel of truth.
As we see all the time, incremental advance, hyped up by the press release as a major breakthrough, but it really isn't. But it's still useful, right?
It is useful.
You can't go too far the other way and dismiss the whole thing because of the hype.
Exactly. I was just glad I found something. It didn't turn out to be a total, dead end.
Yeah. Well, everyone, we're going to take a quick break from our show to talk about our sponsor this week, Quince.
I've been trying to pare down and be really intentional about having staple pieces in my wardrobe, and I found that Quince is the go-to for this. They have all of the pieces that you'll need for spring, like 100% European linen shorts and shirts from only $34. Everything on the site is priced 50 to 80% less than what you'd find at similar brands. And we're not talking cheapy products here. This is premium material without the markup. One of my favorite pieces that I wear every single day is my Mongolian cashmere hoodie. I live in Los Angeles, so it might not sound like a spring piece, but in LA, it gets cold at night, and that is a piece I go to all the time.
Refresh your everyday with luxury you'll actually use. Head to quince.com/SGU for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/SGU for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/SGU.
All right, guys, let's get back to the show. All right, Bob, one of my favorite birthday parties that I ran for my daughters, you actually helped me run. Because was, remember the party that we had for autumn at your haunt?
Ooh.
Remember that?
Oh my God, yeah. I thought you were going to talk about the one earlier where we did a pirate theme that I helped decorate.
That was another one.
Yeah, that was another one. Okay, yeah, two
Under
awesome
the
ones.
Sea or
Absolutely, I remember that. That was a lot of fun. I remember my pirate voice made my throat very sore for many hours after that.
Worth it.
So I recently found a study that I could not ignore, absolutely could not. It describes the impact of recreational fear, i.e. haunted houses, on interpersonal bonding. So do haunted houses and enhance the closeness that people feel as they go through it together? So interesting premise. So let's go through the study findings. Perhaps my plethora of haunted house experiences can offer some insight. Probably not, but let's go through this anyway. So this is a new study from the American Psychological Association, published in the journal Emotion. Never heard of that journal. The title is Haunted Attraction, The Effects of Recreational Fear on Interpersonal Bonding. I just fell in love with the term recreational fear when I read about this in the study, because it's like, it's perfect, because that's what haunted houses provide, right? But not just haunted houses, amusement parks, carnivals, even some fairs are in the business of recreational fear. And you could argue that that industry, if it's even an industry of fear, is billions of dollars. And it's tied to this saying that people in the amusement biz have: fear minus death equals fun, right? You could do some crazy, scary stuff. And if you're extremely confident that you're not going to die from this amazing experience.
How about maiming?
It's not no maiming. If you're confident that there's no maiming, no death, then it's going to be a lot of fun. And the most extreme expression of that in my life was jumping out of a plane. That was wow. What got me through it was the recognition. I asked the guy, "How many times have you done this?" He's like, "About 2,300 times." I'm like, "All right, 2,300 times. The risk is really, it's really kind of low, relatively speaking here." So that's what got me over that hump and let me jump out of that plane at
that and the
2,000
parachute, right?
Oh, he meant 2.3 times, not 20.
And not just the parachute, the backup parachute that would deploy if you were even unconscious. That helped too. So this equation, if you will, fear minus death equals fun, it applies to me when it comes to many things like jumping out of a plane or crazy roller coaster rides, right? But it doesn't really apply to me when it comes to haunted houses. Because I just been loving it so much and so long that fear isn't really a thing in that context at all. For me, the equation is more like fear minus fear plus zombies plus craftsmanship equals happy Bob. That's the equation. I could simplify that equation, of course, but I wanted to show all my work. All right, so let's unpack these studies. The researchers interviewed 3,831 attendees over 5 studies at the Gainesville Fear Garden Haunted House. This is in Florida. So this is obviously a commercial haunted attraction, and they did this study across 2022, 23, and 24 Halloween seasons. Their hypothesis was essentially that is that shared fear, does it act like a social glue because people are experiencing the effects of this emotional, arousal together? So for the first study, they basically just surveyed the people after leaving an attraction. The second to fourth surveys, they interviewed them before and after the experience. And they measured a variety of factors like how scared were you? How much did you enjoy it? Did you hold hands with somebody or in some way have physical contact with them? So it was interesting to note that the researchers described the recreational fear sweet spot, that it occurred when participants reported moderate fear and high enjoyment. And that's kind of obvious, right? That makes a lot of sense. If you're just a little bit scared, maybe a moderate level, and you're enjoying yourself, that's the sweet spot. And but I can't help when I read that to remind myself of all the people that I've seen over the many years that were not in that sweet spot at all. And like some of them, the worst were people that are just literally catatonic. They couldn't move forward. They couldn't move backwards. They were just frozen in place or in a fetal position, and they had to be escorted out. That's how afraid they were. Clearly, that's not the sweet spot. They probably did not have good memories of that at all. Oh, some people, ironically, that would actually pee themselves, literally saying out loud, saying that they peed themselves. They were so scared, but they did. These people seem to still have a good time, which was kind of, maybe you wouldn't expect that. And then there's other people that are also not in that sweet spot, and they just walk through looking so bored and just like not interested, like ho-hum. And I'm always wondering, why are you paying good money, like $25, $30, when you're looking so bored and interested? So, all right, that was just an aside. So the main finding, so if any of you who have not seen this study, what do you think their general findings were? Did people get closer to the people that were in their group traversing the haunt, or what? What do you think some of these results might have been?
Yeah,
I think the knee jerk would be they'd get closer. Yeah,
people cling together when they're facing fear of something dangerous.
One of the patterns I saw over and over, people were more likely to say that the haunted house brought them together if they were more scared. So they got up to that medium level. Of course, the more scared they were, the more they would say when interviewed right after the haunt that they felt that it brought them closer together. Also, a good indicator was physical contact. If there was like specifically hand holding or similar forms of contact, that was also a very strong predictor of these people saying yes, that it made them feel closer. And so, like I said, that pattern showed up over and over across all studies. That was very clear. I'll read from the paper here. They said, on average, our participants agreed more than disagreed that the haunted house experience brought them closer to their companion. And they used a 7-point Likert scale. 48%, almost half, selected a 5, somewhat agree, and 6 agree, and also 7 strongly agree, and was 927 there. So,
did you know, by the way, the guy pronounced his name Likert?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did he? Because everyone calls it a Likert scale.
I know. Everyone's wrong.
Oh,
Likert's
man.
weird.
I feel
Everyone's
so
wrong.
bad. I feel so bad for that guy.
It's like gerrymander and gerrymander.
Yeah.
So
Gerrymander.
Gary Mander.
But whatever, it is, you're right. If most people are saying it that way, that's the way it is now.
yeah. I know. But, sorry, Likert. All right. So, but there's a big but here, because a lot of people were saying that they felt closer, especially the more scared they were. But if they did a deeper dive, if they asked a lot of questions to assess the status of these people's relationship, the needle barely moved. So they were saying one thing, but in reality, there really wasn't really changing, how they felt about these people. But there's 2 ways, though, to look at this. When they looked at people that were really close, like their closest companion, when they looked at those two, say these two people that were fairly close to begin with, fear again was a predictor. If they felt the more fear, the closer they felt. But when they really examined it, when they examined their pre-closeness to the post-closeness assessment, if you will, the change was basically zero, just like not measurable. So, and that kind of makes sense, right? That the closer you are in a relationship, it would take more to move that needle. It was just essentially, immeasurable. Any change would be so small that you couldn't measure it. But when they looked at people that weren't necessarily close, say the two people in the group that aren't like, their best friends, say, when they examined those people, and yet again, of course, fear was a good indicator, and physical contact but the measured increase in closeness was statistically significant in that case, but it was still very small, from 4.61 to 4.81 on that 7-point Likert scale. So the haunted house made people feel closer in the moment. The bonding vibes were definitely there right after, but the before and after closeness score barely budged when it was questioned in detail. So in the final study, they were designed more kind of qualitative. They were designed. The study 5 was designed to explore why was there discrepancy. Why did people feel closer, but they really weren't technically closer. So they interviewed 20 participants, and 16 of the 20 participants emphasized that talking about and processing the event afterwards is what really made them feel closer. So I'll quote the paper here as well. It said 16 out of 20 participants emphasized that reflection and conversation after the haunted house experience, whether during the walk back to the car, on the ride home, or while standing in line for food, they played a central role in creating feelings of closeness. For many, it was not the shared fear alone, but the act of recounting, laughing, and teasing afterward that seemed to deepen the bonding experience. So, unfortunately, they didn't do any like post assessment, like say 3 days after. I wonder what that would indicate. So this demonstrated a couple things here: the potential of this post-experience processing, and related to that, the limits of immediate measurement. Right, those are two things that come out of this. So like I said, perhaps in the future they can do this test again, and like a few days later, and see if it actually is moving that needle a bit. So what about the future? What does the future hold for this kind of research? The researchers say that they could explore other shared recreational fear-related experiences, right? Not just a haunted house. So to generalize from that to other forms of shared fear could be illuminating. For example, adventure sports like skydiving, like I mentioned, or even virtual reality simulations, which can be pretty scary. And Steve, that made me think of your example of doing a zombie VR game and how amazingly scary it was, because it was just like in your face right there, and realistic enough to really, get your blood pumping, right? Remember that?
Yep, absolutely.
So the researchers also say that taken together, these kind of recreational fears could have relevance to fields like relationship therapy, team building interventions, or even entertainment design itself. There we are. Fascinating study. I was thinking, should I keep this till October? It's like, it's going to be evergreen.
You'll find something
but I was
else.
Like, no, we're halfway. We're halfway to Halloween. This is a good time to talk about it. So this was a fun study.
All right. Thanks, Bob. Jay, it's Who's That Noisy time.
All right, guys. Last week I played This Noisy. All right, so we got some guesses here. A listener named Matthew Morrison wrote in and said, "Hi, Jay. I think this week's noisy is a bear cub. My daughter Nev thinks it's a broken vacuum cleaner or a bear cub." These are good guesses, guys. Very strong, but you were both incorrect. So let's keep going and see if we can find a winner over here. Ted Judah wrote in, "Hi, Jay and SGU crew. I believe this week's noisy is a tauntaun freezing before it reaches the first marker." Mm-hmm. Now, Evan, you have some expertise on this subject, don't you?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yes.
What was the first dialogue in The Empire Strikes Back?
Is it Echo 3 to Echo 6 or Echo 7?
You are close enough to win an SGU point. Thank you, Evan. That was not a tauntaun, but, any Star Wars reference days after May the 4th is all good with me. I'm surprised that you were the only one that, acknowledged my love of Star Wars. Another listener named Josh said, "Hi, Jay, it's a moose. I'm assuming telling someone to leave them alone. This is not a moose, but if you ever see a moose, run. That's all I'm going to tell you, because they kill a lot of people and they're unbelievably big.
If it's a chocolate mousse, I'll run towards it.
Exactly. But no, they really do kill people.
With a moose.
Yeah, they're dangerous as hell. I actually have a winner this week. The winner's name is Kenny Haberman. I also have a second place winner, Jake Kindwall, who actually I think sent in his guess today. But I thought I'd acknowledge that Jake got me the right answer. But anyway, back to Kenny. He says, "Hi, Jay and SGU fam. Longtime listener and also Patreon subscriber. I believe this week's Noisy is a Tasmanian devil, but I'm not sure how fast it spins." You have to be old as hell to understand that reference. He says, "I hope to make it to one of the SGU conferences soon." And then P.S., how about that Artemis 2? And he goes into a couple of details, which I think is always cool, and he wants Moonbase Alpha. Seems like there's a quorum here. We really need to get them to do that instead of like 3794Z-7 again, right? It's stupid. We don't want any of that. So yes, it was a Tasmanian devil. I believe it was a young Tasmanian devil. Listen again and tell me what you think. All right, guys, I have a new Noisy for you this week, and the Noisy was sent in by a listener named Juniper Ross.
ไปแล้วครับพี่น้องครับดูบ้างไฟจะไล่สองแล้วหมดไฟพิจิตรโหนฟ้าโหนฟ้าโหนฟ้า
Steve, we still have lots of tickets available to lots of different events, so I will quickly go through this in order. The first thing that we have is 3 shows in Madison, Wisconsin. Those are on the May 29th and May 30th of this month. We have the Secret SGU meetup on Friday night, which is a exclusive meetup with the SGU. Low numbers, food will be provided, and it's a 2-hour event where we just get to hang out and talk. And it's always fun. Of course, George will be there. So if you're interested, please go to the skepticsguide.org website and click our events page. And then the next day, which will be May 30th, we will have both a SGU private show plus, which it means that we'll be doing a 2-hour live SGU recording, but then we also have an hour of fun content. George does an extraordinarily good job at embarrassing some of us and bringing out details that we don't want about our personal lives.
Yes.
With also audience interaction. And Kara is always in the background just laughing because she's so confident she doesn't care what people know about her, which I respect. And then that night we'll be doing a Skeptical Extravaganza. That's our stage show. It's basically an hour and 45 minute to 2-hour show where we are all about doing improv, stand-up type bits. George basically, again, like he has a bunch of different things that he makes us all do that are fun, interesting, and there is a backbone of science in this one, and there are surprises and lots of fun things going on. So if you haven't been to one or you would like to check it out again, please do go to our events page on the website.
All right, thanks, Jay. Guys, you have a great interview coming up with philosopher David Kyle Johnson. So let's go to that interview now. We are joined now by Dr. David Kyle Johnson. Kyle, welcome back to the Skeptics Guide.
Hey guys, thanks for having me back. I'm really excited to do this.
So you are quickly becoming one of our resident philosophers.
I'm honored.
Yeah. So it's good to have discussions, to talk about the philosophy behind skepticism and science and critical thinking and all the stuff that we do. We always like to have topic experts on to make sure, that what we're saying is correct. So we were talking over email, and I think you brought up a very interesting topic that I'd love to discuss on the show: the difference between expertise and authority. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So this difference between expertise and authority is related to this issue of when we're doing science, there's this kind of tension where there's this kind of question about how much we should rely on authority. Because on the one hand, critical thinking teaches us to think for ourselves and challenges how scientific advancements are made. So we shouldn't trust authority. We should think for ourselves. But on the other hand, if we don't have the expertise necessary for research on a topic, well, then we should be seeking out those who do. And pseudosciences often encourage us to do our own research, knowing that we're going to be misled by doing so. And so sometimes the implication or the insistence that we should do our own research can be kind of dangerous, right? So, and you guys have been kind of bumping up against this in your recent podcasts in a number of different ways, which I can overview that if you'd like, some of the different places that it's come up.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind is RFK Jr., who famously does not trust experts and who has said we have to stop listening to experts. And he seems to be following his own advice to disastrous results.
Right, except for when he tries to cite experts, but then does so wrongly. Right. Yes. So he kind of contradicts himself because he will cite experts and he'll do it badly and misunderstand their reasoning and their papers and their evidence. But but he's contradicting what he said. So whenever he was cutting funding for mRNA research, right, he literally said, we need to stop trusting the experts. Trusting the experts is not a feature of science. It's a feature of religion. Right.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So, what? That's so wrong.
Yeah, I know. Right. So, here's the thing. Here, the distinction that you asked me about, Steve, was this distinction between authority and expert. And this comes up in a lot of fallacies, which I'd like to talk about. But here's the distinction a lot of people don't recognize. There are people who have authority by what we might call fiat, right? Mm-hmm. People who have been elected and given power. People who have been appointed by people in power, people who have authority and that they are they have the ability to enact change, or people listen to them, and so they're considered an authority on the subject or something like that, right? So by law, some people literally have authority by force, like at the edge of a sword, right? And yes, that kind of authority is not something that scientists would want to trust. That's the kind of authority that scientists would be and should be skeptical about, right? But obviously, sometimes when we use the word authority, we're talking about authority that's granted by qualification or expertise. Mm-hmm. And that should generally, there's some exceptions here, which I want to talk about, but that generally should be trusted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And so science does not trust fiat authority, but it does trust expertise. After all, that's the whole point of textbooks. Mm-hmm. Scientists are not expected to reinvent the wheel every time they go and do science. They don't have to rediscover everything that previous experts have discovered. We can rely on their expertise and their discoveries and that kind of stuff, right? And so that's why we go to textbooks. That's why we go to other people's research. That's why we look for a consensus, is because we're relying on the expertise of others, right? And
yeah, scientists are narrowly expert. They're narrow experts.
Yes.
Like they're very good at the one thing they study, but they have to rely on the expertise of their colleagues and their peers to understand what's happening over there in that lab.
Yes.
Do you think we should stop using the word authority in that context? Is that confusing?
If we could keep from it, yeah, I think it would be. It would be really nice to delineate between, just start calling fiat authority, right? Like that's when somebody has authority, it's they've had that, and then you say expertise for people who have expertise.
I think that generally is the case within certainly my academic experience, with the exception of the term authoritative. Like we say, that's an authoritative resource or source of information. And what we mean by that is that's a top level expert, basically. Like they're the definitive expert. Like there's no higher really source to go to. But I don't really, don't you think? And then, but I don't think we are in the habit of using the term authority to mean expertise.
Right. And
yeah, but Steve, what if it's not authority, but what if it's authority? How does that fit in?
That does change things.
But it is true, like when we talk about an appeal to authority fallacy, what we're often talking about is individuals trusting somebody simply because they are in a position of power or a position of fame. And very often, like we often talk about how these logical fallacies that are informal, they're not hard and fast, because if the person is an authority figure because they have proper qualifications, because they do have expertise, then we should be appealing to authority. But really, we should be appealing to expertise. That's kind of the distinction there.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that like it probably is generally correct to say that like in academic circles, academics often differentiate between authority and expertise in the way that I'm talking about here, right? But not always.
Colloquially.
Right? Like that well, I mean, not always. Even in academically, some people will say, well, they're an authority on the subject when they mean that they have expertise, right?
Yeah.
But colloquially, I think that out in the real world, people go back and forth on these understandings all the time. And as like Kara mentioned, the appeal to authority fallacy, I have seen misused in textbooks, but certainly I have seen misused out in the public to think that like appealing to a single expert on a subject or even a consensus of experts on a subject is fallacious because that's the appeal to authority fallacy. Right. And so they'll like pseudoscientists will often try to dismiss, scientific reasoning and scientific research and scientific findings and scientific consensus by using this appeal to authority fallacy, wrongly using the appeal to authority fallacy. But they try to use it in this way, not recognizing that distinction.
And that's what RFK was doing.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, literally, he's saying that like we don't rely on. He's actually doing the reverse. He's saying scientists don't rely on expertise. That's what religion does. Like, no. It's the other way. Scientists don't rely on authority, fiat authority. They don't listen to people just because they've been granted authority by a president or by law or by the sword or whatever. They instead trust They trust expertise. They trust experts, right? So he actually has it like he's making the
exactly
opposite
wrong.
Problem, right? Like
yeah,
the opposite mistake.
In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the core elements of the scientific revolution was saying we're not going to base what we know on authority anymore. We're going to base it on process, right? On logic and evidence and facts and observation.
Right.
And so, science is explicitly not relying on authority for information.
Right. Although notice that, right, that example of, Galileo and Copernicus and that kind of stuff bucking the authority, right, is often used by pseudoscientists because they gave Wakefield the Galileo Award or whatever, right? Yep. Because they think, well, what I'm doing what Galileo did is I'm standing up to the authorities. Right. And so they're conflating that term, thinking that what they're doing is equivalent when they're not.
They're using it to their benefit for their own purposes, their own language.
But that just shows how common that kind of conflation of the terms is and then how it's kind of misused.
Like Skeptics been misused and reappropriated.
Right.
Oh, to mean denialist. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we've been talking about the Galileo gambit since the 90s, since I've been involved in skepticism. Yeah, that is an old, tried and true pseudoscientific, game that they play.
Yeah. And it's related to this other stuff that people often argue with science. Like, why should I listen to science, what scientists say now, because they're just going to flip flop and say something later. Because that's the entire history of science is you just have one theory and then it's overturned and you get a new theory and it's overturned. And that, again, wildly misunderstands the way that science progresses. Right. Right.
Thank goodness that's what happens. I don't want to be relying on science from the 1500s.
The Earth will still be the center of the universe.
Right. But notice, too, though, that it's not that we do want there to be progress, but the way that progress happens is usually not whole scale replacement of one theory for another. Right. Usually it's slow refinement over time. Right. And so
we talk about these incremental advances all the time, and paradigm shifts in science, although they do happen, they are really rare, and they're important moments to understand. Yeah.
Right. And even some things that people describe as paradigm shifts aren't complete paradigm shifts. Like going from Newton to Einstein wasn't a huge, giant, like we replaced one theory with another. Einstein is a refinement of Newton, right? Like it's
special case, right? High velocity, high gravity. I mean, you could use Newtonian mechanics solely and land a probe right on Pluto, no problem. But it's just the special cases where you need it.
Right. Exactly right. Right. And so but again, it's this idea that that's how science progress like this. So this is what pseudoscientists will often use as their excuse for bucking the experts and saying that they're wrong and standing up to them. And I'm being scientific by challenging the experts because that's how science progresses. They think that what they're doing represents how science advances. Right. It's you have this established authority and then some new person comes in and says, that's wrong. Here's a brand new theory that, and goes with this completely brand new theory. And that's generally not how science progresses.
Absolutely. I also find that they like the farther they have to go back in time for their example, the worse they are. Usually they're using as an example the transition from pre-scientific thinking to scientific thinking and conflating that with later modifications of scientific thinking. As you say, they're not the same thing.
Exactly. And they're, like you said, they're mistaking this kind of like wholesale replacement from what didn't have scientific evidence to what did, and thinking, well, I can just do that now. And you can't, because there's a big difference. There's kind of two big differences. One is what's established now is established on good evidence, not just on fiat authority, right? And then secondly, it's become so specialized, like science has become so specialized now that you can't be, I mean, you guys bring this up in the Skeptics Guide to the Universe book, right? Like you can't be the days of the lone wolf working in his basement, overturning, what all the other scientists were way too advanced beyond that. You have to have such specialized knowledge to make advancements and stuff. You can't be a non-subject matter expert and have any hope of ever doing something like that.
Well, and even that was largely a myth.
Yes.
Like even when we look back, that was largely a myth, that there was like one dude, like he was propped up by his wife almost always. Like almost always. Yep. And he had lab assistants and a ton of researchers working with him. And he was corresponding with all of his colleagues on other, and
he was a link in a chain, and we just boil it all down to this one guy,
Yep.
Exactly.
So can I talk briefly about how this relates to a couple of other like informal logical fallacies?
If you must.
I don't think so. I'll go right ahead. Sorry.
So I love you guys. All right. So I think this leads to a misunderstanding of two different logical fallacies, the ad hominem fallacy and the genetic fallacy. Yeah. So the ad hominem fallacy is, of course, like the general idea is that you shouldn't attack the arguer, you need to attack the argument. And if you attack the arguer and not the argument, then you're committing the fallacy. But that's it's like, as you guys often say, it's way more nuanced and complicated than that, right? So like, all things being equal, arguments should stand or fall on their own merits. And it doesn't really matter who puts them out, like kind of all things being equal. But that's not the only time that the phrase ad hominem, the fallacy ad hominem is people are accused of committing that fallacy. Sometimes people just are expressing their view or their opinion, right? And somebody will say, well, you don't have expertise in that area. And someone will say, well, that's an ad hominem fallacy. That doesn't matter, or whatever. It's like, no, ad hominem only applies to whether we're evaluating an argument, and you're not giving an argument. You're just giving me your opinion. So whether or not you have the relevant expertise is actually relevant here, right? In addition, this is kind of a related point, but like when somebody's giving an argument, often the premises of those arguments are something that you would only believe because the person is telling you that they are true. Now, if the argument's valid, then the conclusion follows from those premises. But if the only reason you have to believe the premises is the word of that person, then the expertise and like reliability or trustworthiness of the person is relevant to whether you should accept the conclusion, because it's relevant to whether you should accept the premises, right? And so pointing out that, well, you've lied a lot in the past, or you don't have the relevant expertise to say that those premises are true, that's not a fallacy. That is very, very relevant. And of course, it's also relevant if somebody's telling you like how to interpret scientific evidence or something like that. If they don't have the proper scientific expertise, like RFK does not have the proper scientific expertise, it is not fallacious. It's not an ad hominem to point out that you do not have the proper expertise to properly interpret what that study is saying.
But don't you think things get complicated? Sorry to interject, but things get complicated when we see, and this is a huge problem that we're always drawing attention to on the SGU, when we see somebody who does have these certifications that would lead one to expect that they have proper expertise, and they still promote pseudoscience. It's those and they love cherry picking. It's the Dr. Oz's of the worlds, and the doctor like whoever, and the who's the alien guy.
Avi Loeb.
Avi Loeb. Yes. It's these individuals who actually try to rest on those very certifications in order to make waves, and it's effective. People do believe that.
Yeah, but that's where the nuance is. So just saying that lacking the expertise calls into question, you citing yourself as an authority or saying that your judgment or your whatever is reliable, etc., doesn't mean that somebody who does have expertise is automatically correct. And if further, when we talk about expertise, and I think you're probably going to get to this, we're often talking about consensus.
Yes.
Scientific authority or scientific expertise or the consensus of opinion never rests on an individual person, because any individual, no matter what their background, no matter what their expertise, can be horribly wrong. The more people you have sort of agreeing with each other, the more likely those biases will average out, and you'll have a sort of the wisdom of the crowds kind of effect applied
more
to
qualified
expertise.
people, not just people, but qualified people, obviously.
Yeah, this is back to the, we had this conversation decades ago when the news media would have the member of the 99% of climate scientists agree sitting on one side of the desk and the one dude on the other side of the desk. Yeah. And it's like, this is not a balanced conversation.
Right. Yeah. John Oliver made that point explicitly well, right? When he had 75 scientists all come out, right, to, to talk to the one, whatever, right? But so this is an issue that I wanted to talk about because I talk about it in my book. So in my book that's coming out hopefully in July, How, Why, and When to Think Scientifically, one of the pedagogical points that motivates part of it is, I think, a shortcoming in classic critical thinking textbooks and classical critical thinking pedagogy and the way people teach critical thinking. And that is, it's all about teaching the critical thinking skills, and that's all that it is. So we learn the logic, we learn the fallacies and that kind of stuff, which is all good. I think we need to do all of that. But one of the things that is often lacking is that we are not teaching and instilling intellectual humility in students. It's such that they need to recognize that they are not experts, and that even with a critical thinking class, they are not going to have the expertise necessary in every topic to be able to evaluate the evidence and figure out what's going on. They need to be able to recognize when they are lacking expertise and they lack the skills to be able to come to a justified conclusion on their own about that topic, and therefore be motivated to seek out experts on that topic to figure out what the consensus is, to do research on that topic. And notice the distinction between I love this distinction, do your own research. Well, it really depends on what you mean by research, right? Yeah. I could be researching to figure out what the consensus is, or I could be conducting research, doing an actual experiment. Well, most people are not qualified to do that, right? So you shouldn't be doing that, right? And of course, very often what people do when they do research is they're just trying to confirm their bias or whatever. They're engaging in confirmation bias or whatever. But it's okay to do your own research if you mean try to figure out what the consensus is. It's not as okay if you're not a subject matter expertise to do your own research if you're just trying to figure out, well, what should I think about this? Because if you approach it that way, well, you could find any kind of evidence, all kinds of lone experts and stuff who disagree with the consensus, and you'll be in big trouble there, right? And so there's this interesting, so obviously it's fallacious to appeal to authority when they are not a relevant expert. So then the question becomes, okay, when are they a relevant expert and when is that okay? And as Steve points out, obviously, when you're appealing to a consensus, that does not seem to be a fallacious move. I actually think that Bertrand Russell doesn't go far enough on this. So Bertrand Russell has these 3 rules about how non-experts should treat expert opinion. And basically, I'm kind of going off my memory here, but basically there's something along the lines of, if the experts are all agreed, the non-expert can't know that they're wrong. They can't know that they're wrong. If the experts are divided on the topic, so 50% say X and 50% say not X, the non-expert can't say, but I know which side is right. And if the experts are all agreed that there's not enough evidence to settle the matter, the non-expert would kind of do wise to suspend judgment, to say, well, then I don't know, right? I think those last 2 are really good. I think the first one doesn't go far enough. I think if all the experts are agreed that something is true, the non-expert would do good, would be best for them to say, and the experts are probably right. I agree with the experts, because they're not in a position to know otherwise. And so I think that's good. It is not, another fallacy that's misunderstood is some people think that's appeal to popularity. Oh, you're just saying what the consensus says. And so that's just appeal to the masses or appeal to popularity. No, appeal to popularity is saying that literally if it's popular among the masses, then it must be true. No, that doesn't follow, because the masses can believe really false things for really bad reasons. But a consensus among scientists is reached in a different way, and there's safeguards there to make sure, not to be 100% certain, but, to guard against people being led astray. And it's a lot more likely to be true. And so appealing to the consensus is not a fallacious appeal to popularity. But it can be okay sometimes, interestingly, to appeal to a single expert. Like when you listen to your doctor, right? You're not looking for a consensus. He tells you that you have a disease and that this would work. This medication would be good for you to take, and you just believe them. And I think it's justified to do that.
But even then, getting a second opinion is a good idea if there's a high stakes or
it's about risk and benefit.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah. I'm just kind of pointing out that there are certain conditions where we do justifiably listen to lone experts, right? Like in low stakes, situations where your doctor tells you you've got, the flu, or you've got this, and so you should take that or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
But there's also the assumption in there that lone expert is themselves listening to expert consensus, which doctors explicitly do. That's what the standard of care is. The standard of care is built upon largely consensus opinion among experts, and if you violate that standard of care, you're liable to get sued for malpractice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right?
The only time I can think of when like the very, very lone expert does become relevant or necessary is when there's, let's say in biomedical science, for example, there's an incredibly rare disease and there is the person, and even still, they're not the only person, but sometimes there will be the world expert on something that most people are turning to because they have done the highest level and, the most work on it.
Yeah.
But that's such a rare example.
Yeah, it's a good example, but it is a rare example of when appealing to that single expert, is justified. But this is a really important, like Steve brings up a really good, important point about like the standards of care and like the doctors having pressure on them to align with the consensus. And this is a different, so I have a whole chapter on appealing to authority in my book. And this is something that really kind of takes students, I think, by surprise when I talk about this in class, is that like the reason it's okay to trust your doctor and not the person that you see on TikTok is because the doctor is motivated to get things right. There are financial motivations, professional motivations. If they don't get things right, if they screw up really often, they're going to lose their job. So they have a really strong motivation to get things right. As a result, they're going to seek out the consensus because they know that is what is most likely to get them to the truth. So since there is that kind of pressure on them, you can just kind of take their word for it, again, in low stakes occurrences, but generally you can trust their expertise because they're motivated to get it right. And so that they're more than likely relying on consensus. TikTokers, and this is something that kind of astounds me that my students don't think about, right? TikTokers and influencers don't have that motivation. They're not going to be held accountable if they say something that costs someone their life or makes somebody sick or whatever. The way that they're rewarded is with likes and clicks and shares or whatever, and they get those by being more outrageous. And like the more kind of outlandish thing they say, the more money they make. And so they're actually reversed. They're actually motivated to lie. Right. And so that's why you can't. And that kind of may seem obvious to us, but my students are kind of like taken aback by that, I think, sometimes, because they kind of think like, well, why would somebody just get online and lie? What would they have to get out of that? What would they win? What would they get out of lying? Right. They can't be just lying for no reason. So they're not. Therefore, they must be telling the truth. Right. And they don't realize that, no, they're motivated to lie because lying makes money. Online, lying makes money. And when that clicks for them, I think they really kind of realize, this is actually a really good reason to be skeptical of practically everything that I see online.
Mm-hmm. And the other layer here, so I don't think they're all lying. I think many of them are. I think most of them are bullshitting, meaning that they are not following a process of due diligence and logic and evidence to make sure that what they're saying is actually true. Whereas physicians, as you say, are highly motivated to do that because there's a lot of downsides if they get things wrong. And again, when we appeal to an expert or to a consensus of experts, in the label expert, there is it shouldn't be an assumption. Sometimes it has to be explicit. They're legitimate experts, meaning that they are experts in a valid discipline that has a method behind it, a transparent, self-correcting, evidence-based, internally, logically inconsistent method. Because the other problem we get into is when chiropractors say, well, we're the experts in chiropractic, right? Or acupuncturists say, well, we're the experts in chiropractic. In acupuncture, you should listen to us. Right. But the problem is their expertise is not legitimate. It's a fake expertise.
You have a degree in baloney.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an expertise.
That's exactly what it is. It's a homeopath with a degree in baloney. It's not valid. So that you have to include that layer too. Is the expertise itself legitimate?
Yeah, is it something that you can have an expertise in, right? Mm-hmm. So this is why
Ed Warren was a demonologist. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So here's another one that I think really people, and this is obviously related, the genetic fallacy.
Yeah.
Which is often thought of like it's fallacious to dismiss an argument based on its origin, its genesis. It's that's what's called the genetic fallacy on who gave it. Then that supposedly commits the genetic fallacy, and that's fallacious.
Didn't Hitler say that?
Yeah, right. And so it's wrong, right?
So it must be wrong.
Like this is a complete misunderstanding of the fallacy. What's fallacious is to dismiss or ignore the evidence for a claim based on the origin of a claim. So if a claim has a kind of nefarious origin where it wasn't produced initially in a reliable circumstance, I always use the example of Frederick August Kekulé, I always say his last name wrong. He came up with the idea of the ring structure of benzene, supposedly as the story goes, after he had a dream of a snake eating its own tail. And so he was like, oh, the molecule must be ring shaped or whatever. Cool. Dreams aren't a reliable source of information.
What?
However, we can't use the fact that the idea came to him in a dream to dismiss all of the evidence that he and his team and everyone else since then has gathered for the fact that benzene is ring structured. So you can't dismiss the evidence for something based on its origin. If it's got a nefarious origin, but it's got evidence, you look at the evidence, you don't worry about the origin. However, if something doesn't have good evidence, if you also realize that its origin is nefarious, if it's not reliable, that can be even further reason to think that it's not true. Great example of this that you guys talked about a few weeks ago is Bigfoot. Right now, as skeptics, we know that the evidence for Bigfoot is not very good, right? Like often they're faked or whatever, and then it's it's personal reports and da 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 da. The evidence is not very good, so really we're already skeptical. We're already pretty sure Bigfoot doesn't exist anyway, right? But then when we realize that there's this new evidence of like test footage of the original Bigfoot thing that went wrong, and the same people who have the famous video that everybody knows that thinks is like knockdown, drag out evidence of Bigfoot, well they rehearsed it before, and you could clearly see that it was just a guy in an ape suit, and so clearly this evidence is fabricated, right? Not even the original case, the origin of the claim for Bigfoot is fabricated. That's kind of like the final nail in the coffin. Now we don't have to worry about it's just gone at that point, right? Once we realize that the origin is that, and people, well, that's the genetic fallacy. You can't dismiss it based on its origin. No, if the origin is that flimsy and we have no good evidence, beyond that, right? Well, that's a really even more reason to think that it's false.
Here's another layer to that that makes it even trickier, in my opinion, is that so often I will make the argument that a particular medical pseudoscience is unlikely to be true because its origins are purely pseudoscientific. It doesn't make it impossible to be true, but it raises the question, what are the odds that somebody invented something for purely superstitious reasons and it turns out to be true? It's not impossible, but how lucky would that have been? So in particular, acupuncture, for example, which at its core was essentially astrology, and the existence and number and location of acupoints was pure superstition. What are the odds that it correlates to something real and physical and physiological? It's astronomical, and therefore that origin does tell you something about the prediction, the predictability of whether or not the claim is true. Now, of course, if you had good evidence that it were true, that would trump the origins of it. Right. But absent that, it's a compelling argument that it's just probabilistically not true, right?
Yeah, and to me, that's what it is, right? When you realize, once you already recognize the evidence is bad, then you realize it has that nefarious origin. That's exactly why identifying the nefarious origin kind of puts the final nail in the coffin, because that probability that you would just happen to make up something that turned out to be true is just so astronomically low. Then that's it. Then we can definitely dismiss it at that point, right? That's such a good example, and it drives me crazy that people misunderstand the genetic fallacy in that way, right? But like back to Kara's point about what about the single expert that is an actual expert, but they differentiate from the consensus, right? I mean, that's where we just have to that's just one of the situations in which we realize, well, the reason that although there are other times when appealing to a single expert is acceptable, this is not one of them. because they're contrary to the consensus.
Yeah, and even if it's not a single, because I think we have to be careful there, it's not always a single expert. Like RFK has managed to get a lot of experts, quote unquote, people with the right credentials and degrees on his team, but that doesn't mean that they represent a
They're not representative.
legitimate viewpoint within their field.
So much in politics where you essentially just pack your expert panel with cherry-picked experts that all agree in one direction. It's not a representative consensus, right? It's a manufactured consensus in that it gives the illusion of a consensus because you put your big fat hairy thumb on the scale and made sure that only experts who had one opinion are expressing that opinion in the venue, that you're creating. Yeah, so it's just you can create the illusion of the consensus that way. So that I got to encounter that all the time in the political arena.
Yeah, it's infuriating because if you just walk down any hall in any university and go, is this right? All the people coming out of their offices are going to be like, no. None of us agree with those guys.
Yeah. And one of the things, too, that they can do often, I'm not saying this always happens or whatever, is that you kind of put a quote unquote expert on this, Kara, that sometimes they kind of look like they're experts because they have a somewhat related degree, but it's actually not as specialized as it needs to be. It's in a tangential, area of study or whatever that to the layperson makes it look like they know what they're doing, but it turns out they don't. I mean, a great example of this is Dr. Oz, right? Who is like a heart surgeon, right? Isn't he a heart surgeon, right? That does not make him that doesn't make him an expert in epidemiology. That doesn't make him an expert, in infectious disease or whatever, right? But people will, cite him, or he's not like, he did so many diet supplements and that kind of stuff on his show. Well, he's not a nutritionist either. And so that does not qualify him to talk about that. And so
and even that's better than what we often, like I have a friend in LA who,
you do?
Or I should say an acquaintance in LA
okay,
who,
not a full thread. Okay.
who sees a doctor.
Oh, air quotes.
And for their alternative medicine. And this doctor has a degree in like English literature. It's like,
I say.
Don't think so.
Yeah, so there's a good list of questions you could ask whenever there's an appeal to expertise or quote-unquote authority. Is it a real expert in a legitimate field? Do they align with the consensus? Or are they an outlier? Is their background not relevant to their stated expertise? And at the end of the day, is there evidence to support what they're saying?
Right.
But that's a lot of work. It is a lot of
work, right? You could also look to whether or not they proved trustworthy, in the past, right? So like, I think that
what's their history? And
this is why it's not an ad hominem, right? To like point out that somebody's not trustworthy or they've gotten wrong conclusions before, and then to say, well, then I'm not going to, I'm not going to accept your argument here, right? So RFK Jr. is a really good example of this. I don't have the specific quotes in front of me, but a couple of weeks ago, whenever he was on Capitol Hill, he tried to cite 2 different studies to prove that vaccines were not responsible for like the lower mortality rate and infection rate. It was, right? So it's sanitation that's responsible, not vaccines, for the lowering of mortality rate and that kind of stuff, right? And like there were a couple of doctors, medical professionals on the panel in front of him, and they like asked for the author and the year, and they looked it up, and they basically pointed out like what these studies are arguing is that the reduction in mortality and death in the first half of the century before we got the vaccines was due to sanitation, right? Yeah. But they explicitly argue that after the invention of vaccines, the huge drop in mortality and death that happened after the vaccines, where it literally went almost to nothing, that was due to vaccines. Like that's there in the paper. And
that's the measles vaccine you're talking about.
Yeah. Right. I think
that shows a perfect example of one of 2 things happening, either intentionally, actually it's not even cherry picking, it's just misleading people, or somebody without expertise not having the skills and the training to read a scientific paper.
Yep. And in RFK's case, he's a lawyer. He is used to making a lawyer's case for something, not a scientific case for something, and he consistently confuses those two things. He thinks because I can marshal evidence to make a case for something, it's legitimate. It's like, no, that's not how science works. You got to look at all the evidence, and you have to try to prove yourself wrong. Lawyers are not used to proving themselves wrong.
Correct. It's a whole other skill set.
This is a great example of that. He could twist this study to support a case, and he thinks that's legitimate.
Right. And it's not, I mean, not only is it like a lawyer's skill set, but it's like an entirely different approach, right? Like RFK wasn't this kind of lawyer, but like if you are tasked with, defending a defendant, right, then it is your task to build the best case that you can for their innocence, even when you know they're guilty. And that what that might entail that you have to do is you mention this evidence, but not that evidence, right? Like that's kind of what you have to do to give them their best defense or whatever, right? Well, that's a court of law. That's not science. That's not what you do in science, but that's exactly what he's doing here. And like Kara points out, it's either intentional and malicious or it is incompetence. But either way, I shouldn't trust what you say. Somebody who does that, I should not trust what they say.
Well, Kyle, thank you so much. That was a fantastic discussion. And in fact, you're going to hang out with us and stay for science or fiction.
Yes, I'm going to lose badly at it, but that's what I'd like to do. Yes, that'd be great.
All right, sounds good. All right, here we go.
It's time for science or fiction.
Each week, I come up with 3 science news items or facts, 2 real and 1 fake, and then I challenge my panel of skeptics to tell me which one is the fake. Just 3 regular news items this week. Are you guys ready?
Ready.
Yep.
All right, sir. Here we go. Item number 1. Observing a recent volcanic eruption, scientists discover a potential method for reducing atmospheric methane involving volcanic ash and seawater. Item number 2, scientists present a design for pure copper 3D printable cold plates that, under modeled conditions, could reduce data center cooling energy use to about 1.1% of total energy consumption, compared with more than 30% in conventional air-cooled designs. And item number 3, in a recent extensive survey of Arctic fish, researchers found the first example of a fish, the snailfish, that is able to use its tail fin for backward propulsion. Okay, Bob, you go first.
Observing a recent volcanic... Are you sure it's my turn to go first, bastard?
Yeah.
I didn't think you were going to go so cleanly,
eruption, so they've deduced a method for reducing atmospheric methane involving volcanic ash and seawater. How does that work? Number 2 here is a design for a pure copper 3D printable cold plate to reduce data center cooling energy use 1.1%, which actually would be a lot. That would be huge, but that sounds weird.
Bob, not by 1.1%, to 1.1%.
T-O.
You're kidding.
So now it is 1.1% as opposed to 30.
Wow. Okay. Damn, I hope that's true. Let's see. 3 here. Recent extensive survey of Arctic fish researchers found the first example of a fish, the snailfish, that's able to use its tail fin for backward propulsion. Ooh.
Yeah, it could swim backwards.
Yeah, I gathered that. Damn, man. None of these are leaping out at me.
Not even the fish one?
All right, that was a good one, Evan. Usually your puns are terrible, but I like that.
They're all good, thank you.
Evan's puns are not terrible. They're all good, all of them.
Thank you, I'm an expert.
Don't encourage him.
You just bought me another 20 years of puns. Thank you, Kyle.
I laugh at him all the time, Evan.
You got that
because this copper one just sounds would be just too good. I'm going to say that one's probably baloney, so I'll say that's fiction.
Okay, Evan.
Okay, volcanic eruption.
Not joking now, are you?
No, I'm not. This just got real. Potential method for reducing atmospheric methane involving volcanic ash and seawater. So you can have a volcanic eruption under the water, right? I mean, volcanoes don't have to be above the surface of the water, I think, right? So if that were the case, there you go. You would have your ash and your seawater. And they've discovered something in it. I think that one's plausible. So it's the other ones. The copper, pure copper, 3D printable cold plates. I know nothing about these. Fascinating stuff. And brings it down to 1.1 of total energy consumption compared with more than 30%. Oh, that's a huge drop, right, Bob? That is enormous. And then the last one is about the Arctic fish, which it's a snailfish, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Able to use its tail fin for backward propulsion. I got this fish in my head, right? I'm looking at it like the fish. How could it do fish swim backwards, don't they? Can they? How does that work? Or are they using their front fins as opposed to their tail fin? They're not using their tail fin to swim backwards. They're using their side fins, right, to push, kind of like oars on a... I'll say the fish is the fiction. I don't think it's the tail fin that does the backwards propulsion.
Okay, Kara.
I think it's the fish, but for a different reason, because in reading this, okay, so I'll just go through them. Potential method for reducing atmospheric methane involving volcanic ash and seawater. Okay. I don't know what that method could be, but I'm with Evan on the fact that, yeah, you could combine the two when there's an underwater explosion, or just maybe somebody happened upon this in some sort of like model. I have no idea with the material science one. I hope it's true. I feel like we need this. We need to figure out how to reduce the total energy consumption of data centers. So I can imagine that a lot of very smart people are working on this right now. The one that does bother me, and it's because of the wording, so I'm just going to read it verbatim here. In a recent extensive survey of Arctic fish, okay, I buy that, researchers found the first example of a fish, the snailfish, that is able to use its tail fin for backward propulsion. I cannot imagine that that is true. And like maybe I am misunderstanding fish fins here, but I've seen... Yeah, have you ever seen those like ghost knife fish, the ones with like the wiggly bottom? I think that is their tail fin, or at least it's their under fin. It's their like tummy fin.
Like a frill or something.
Yeah, but it connects all the way to their tail, and they swim in all directions. So I don't feel like this is the first example of a fish to use its tail fin to swim backward. Maybe it's the first example of like an Arctic fish. Or, I don't know, maybe it is the first that uses its tail fin, but I feel like there's too many little things that could have been changed here to make this one the fiction. So I'm going to go with Evan, but for a different reason on that one.
Okay, Kyle?
Well, this proves my point that having critical thinking skills does not always enable you to tell what's truth or fiction.
No, it does not.
You need the relevant expertise. This is why I suck at this game. I always lose when I'm playing at home. So there's a few ways to make this decision. I could be pessimistic, and whichever one would be the best news, well, that one must be the fiction because things can't be that good. I could go with the middle one because of the percentages and think that Steve's doing his order of magnitude thing. So it's some kind of reduction, but it's not that grandiose. I could go with the fact that Kara always gets things right for the wrong reason. And go with item 3. I do kind of have a memory of fish with really dexterous tails or whatever, and they can go in all different directions. But I don't know if that's classified as an Arctic fish, or I don't know if it's classified as like a tail fin. I should say I don't know if that's going to be qualified as a tail fin or if they're going to call that fin something else. I'm going to be wrong and go with number 2, even though I'm betting against Kara, because I think there might be an order of magnitude thing here. And also, I'm relying on probably some wrong facts here, but my understanding was that most data centers are cooled by water. That's why people talk about, how much water you waste with every prompt that you give them, because they have this huge amount of water that has to be used for cooling them. And this is talking about air cooling. Now, maybe it is true because of this, because it's like, oh yeah, they can get it down to 1.1 total energy consumption compared with 30% for those that use air cooling, but that is irrelevant because most of them don't do air cooling, they do water cooling. So this is true, but who cares, because nobody does it that way. But despite
that's why
all
the
of
word
that,
conventional, that's why the word conventional is in there, because it is used.
Oh, okay. I know it's used. Is this the conventional air cooled designs, or the air cooled designs are what are conventional? That's what most people use. I should go with 3, but I'm going to go with 2. So 2 is my guess.
Okay, Jay?
Okay, the first one, observing a recent volcanic eruption, scientists discover a potential method for reducing atmospheric methane involving volcanic ash and seawater. Yeah, on the surface, that one sounds pretty impossible, right? There'd be so much stuff coming out of a volcano. So reducing atmospheric methane, maybe they do something to the volcano beforehand. Oh, I got volcanic ash and seawater. Okay, seawater, because there's plenty of that. Let me think about that. I'll go to the second one here. Scientists present a design for pure copper 3D printable cold plates that, under modeled conditions, could reduce data center cooling energy use to about 1.1% of total energy consumption, compared with the 30%. Yeah, I think with enough metal and with the right engineering that you would be able to, that's pretty damn significant. And then you're saying it's 3D printed, these cold plates. That's really cool. Yeah, that one is actually kind of complicated too. All right, let me go on to the third one. In a recent extensive survey of Arctic fish, researchers found the first example of a fish, the snailfish, that is able to use its tail fin for backward propulsion. Okay, well, at least this one is straightforward. So the first one about the volcano, I would need a lot more information to be able to really suss this one out. So I just got to say, I don't know about that one. The second one about the copper plating, I mean, I could see that they could come up with some type of enhanced cooling system that's a lot more energy efficient, using these 3D printed copper plates. That doesn't sound crazy at all. Now, Kara did not like the fish swimming backwards with its rear fin, right? Yeah, I mean, and that just seems to go against everything that's designed to do. Kara did not like this one. I don't like this one either. I'm going with Kara.
Okay, so you all agree on the first one, so we'll start there. Observing a recent volcanic eruption, scientists discover a potential method for reducing atmospheric methane involving volcanic ash and seawater. You all think this one is science, and this one is science. This is science.
Yay.
So yeah, this was not just modeled or anything. They observed, this was in 2022, a large volcano erupting, and the volcano belched out a huge amount of methane, which they do. It's still insignificant compared to, person-caused methane release,
Haha, we got you beat,
anthropogenic
volcano.
methane release. But it is a lot, and the researchers observed using satellite imagery that in the clouds created by the volcano, there was a lot of formaldehyde. Now, that's odd. Do you know why that's odd?
Well, usually there's an organic compound to formaldehyde, isn't there?
It's not so much that as formaldehyde is a very short half-life, right? It should only survive for a couple of hours.
Oh, okay.
And so they observed this cloud for days, and there was formaldehyde in the cloud for days, which means it had to be being created for days. And so they had to figure out, well, what's the process that's creating the formaldehyde, and where could that come from? And what they found is that it can come from the methane in the cloud itself, that methane was being transformed into formaldehyde and then subsequently into CO2 and water. And what would do that? Well, that's a reaction that has to be catalyzed. And so what they figured out was that the volcanic ash was acting as like a nidus for this reaction, and the chloride from the sodium chloride in the salt water was catalyzing this reaction to turn formaldehyde ultimately into CO2 and water. So could this method be replicated to reduce methane in the atmosphere? Who knows? But it's a starting point, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so that's an interesting observation.
Okay.
All right, I guess we'll go on. We'll take them in order. We'll go on to number 2. Scientists present a design for pure copper. That's right, copper. 3D printable cold plates that, under modeled conditions, could reduce data center cooling energy use to about 1.1% of total energy consumption, compared with more than 30% in conventional air-cooled designs. Bob and Kyle, you think this one is the fiction. Everyone else thinks this one is science. And this one is science. This one is science.
Yeah, Kyle and I just don't care.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy it's science.
Yeah, it's cool.
I was right.
Yeah, it's
it was
great.
a mistake. I should have gone with 3. I was right.
Yeah, me too.
So the cold plates work by mainly through convection and conduction, right? They're next to the chips. The heat from the chips go into the cold plates, and then it uses liquid cooling a coolant to cool the cool plates themselves. So it's very, very efficient. Data centers are cooled either they have an air-cooled design, or they have a liquid-cooled design, or they have like a hybrid air and liquid-cooled design. The air-cooled designs use 30 to 50% of the total energy consumption for cooling. The liquid-cooled design, from what I'm reading, use maybe closer to 15%, 10 to 15% of the total energy for cooling. And again, this cold plate coolant-cooled system would only be 1.1%. So what they did was they designed a topology that could be 3D printed, right? So the 3D printing was built into the design from the beginning. And they found that it was this topology optimized cold plates, even when they're made of just pure copper, not platinum or anything, right? That had certain features. It had a lower thermal resistance and a fixed flow rate at up to 68% lower pressure drop at equal thermal resistance, if that means anything to you, compared to other fin designs. They said using those features, when you model it, it should only require 1.1% of the total energy used by the data center to achieve adequate cooling, which is a dramatic decrease, 30 times whatever of the energy used for the conventional air cooling. So yeah, that could be a huge benefit.
Billions.
Because, data
How
centers.
many billions would that save?
Absolutely. Right? Data centers use a lot of energy. That's kind of one of their key features. And anything that reduces the energy, like cutting their energy use by a third, would be huge. Would be absolutely huge.
Oh, God.
So again, this is, I had to say, under modeled conditions, because they haven't physically tested it yet. But it does seem to be very promising. All of this means that, number 3, in a recent extensive survey of Arctic fish, researchers found the first example of a fish, the snailfish, that is able to use its tail fin for backward propulsion is the fiction. What makes it the fiction, though? What part of it is the fiction? Is it that no fish could swim backwards, or this isn't the first fish to swim backwards? Kara thinks this isn't the first fish to swim backwards.
Not the first, I'd say.
I go with Kara.
All right. The answer is it's not the first one, and this fish can't swim backwards.
Yeah, I think I said that this fish can't swim backwards.
So,
Otherwise, it was spot on.
Yeah, otherwise.
So the paper, or the press release of the paper is like, fish can swim backwards. Then when I looked at the study, it's like, this fish isn't swimming backwards. It's just curling up its tail and allowing the current to carry it backwards. It's passive.
It's not even using its side fins to push it.
Yeah, so then I said, that took me down the rabbit hole. Well, can any fish swim backwards? Specifically, so here's the thing, specifically using its tail fin. So that's a critical element, because there are lots of fish that could swim backwards, but these are fish that swim through undulation, like an eel, right? And that incorporates their tail fin, right? But it's their whole body. And so, if you undulate in one direction, it moves you forward. If you reverse the undulation, you swim backwards. So yeah, eels can swim backwards into a crevice to hide there, to get at their prey, for example. Undulating fish swimming backwards, no big deal, right? There's lots of examples of that. All right, but what about non-undulating fish? There are some fish that can swim backwards using their pectoral fins. Sometimes they have a specific fin on their belly that they could use, but it's very rare for a fish to actually use its tail fin for propulsion. That's why I specifically said that. What some fish do is they swim backwards with their dorsal fins, and they use their tail fin as a rudder to sort of control where they're going. But they're not propelling themselves with their tail fin. And the reason why most fish cannot do this is just because of the anatomy of the tail fin. The tail fin evolved for propulsion in one direction, forward. However, there is at least one fish, and that is the bluegill, that evolved new muscles, right? It has a separate tail fin muscle anatomy, and those muscles allow it to, if you can imagine this, so the tail fin is not just going back and forth, it actually can curl all the way around and throw a jet of water forward. Can you imagine that?
Cool.
Right, so it creates these small little forward jets of water with its tail by sort of cupping it and curling it around with special muscles that most fish don't have. And that fish can actually propel itself backwards with its tail fin. But that's like
interesting.
There's that's the only one that I could confirm. There's I found references to a couple of other ones like the boxfish and the cowfish, which may be able to do something similar. But that's really the only one that really is clearly using its tail fin for backward propulsion. It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
definitely.
It is.
But I knew the big risk of this is the right for the wrong reason. But because people say, "Oh, you can't swim backwards," even though you can. But you guys actually got it for the right reason, which is that the snailfish isn't the first one. But the snailfish itself, it's just passively swimming backwards. It's not actively swimming backwards. But this was an extent what they did with the surveys. They basically put cameras in the Arctic and then just gathered a ton of data, and they found all kinds of weird stuff that they'd never seen before. So there's still a lot to discover. If we just put cameras down there.
I can't help but think about Shaun of the Dead when he's like, dogs can't look up.
That's right.
I don't know why. Fish can't swim backwards.
Big Al says they can.
Well, Kyle, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on. I had a blast, even though I completely lost.
Yeah, as predicted, you lost science fiction.
We all gained
after a while.
We all gained.
In our
maybe if we have you back, we'll give you another crack at it. Maybe.
Cool. I could also do put one together, do like a philosophy or fiction or something like that. I could put something like that.
Yeah, I'm always happy to have other people do my work for me. Absolutely. Yeah, Evan, can you do the quote?
Outside of their particular area of expertise, scientists are just as dumb as the next person. Richard Feynman.
Bravo.
I do like that quote, but I disagree with it.
I knew
there's
you
a
were going to push
nuance.
back on that.
There's a nuance to this. So the just as dumb is I would push back on because experts in one field do have some general knowledge about like logic and scholarship and evidence and stuff.
Right, how they achieved
how to think about things
in the first place.
Yeah,
right.
And they should understand the gulf between what they know as an expert on a specific topic and the general public, and hopefully they apply that across the board. I encourage people to do that, to realize that they are as ignorant in other areas as they think everybody else is in the area that they actually are an expert in. So being an expert in something, I think, does give you some general intellectual skills that people who are an expert in nothing do not have. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think Richard was driving home the point, though, that they're an expert in their subject. They're non-experts in all the other subjects.
The core of it I agree with. Absolutely. Yeah. But I just want to throw that nuance in there.
Yeah. If nothing else, your expertise in one topic should at least make you aware of the Dunning-Kruger effect. And so that you're not as apt to think that you know more about a subject than you do where other people who don't have expertise might not be aware of that.
It should make you more humble.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes that line is falling.
It has the opposite effect.
Yeah, there are exceptions. Yeah.
There is the Nobel Prize effect, man, where I don't know that it's real or not, but there's like famous examples of Nobel Prize winners that went later in their career, became flagrant pseudoscientists. So yeah, it is true enough to that extent. All right, well, thank you all for joining me this week.
Thanks, Steve.
Sure,
Thanks, Steve.
And until next week, this is your Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. Skeptic's Guide to the Universe is produced by SGU Productions, dedicated to promoting science and critical thinking. For more information, visit us at theskepticsguide.org. Send your questions to info@theskepticsguide.org. And if you would like to support the show and all the work that we do, go to patreon.com/skepticsguide and consider becoming a patron and becoming part of the SGU community. Our listeners and supporters are what make SGU possible.